The note sheet that you picked up that starts off with Jan Janssen and goes on to the back, it's not a motif chart. It's not like a double secret. If you fill this out, you can use it on your TWA next week tank chart or anything like that. But because the book, but because the book is so scattered, I thought it was good to at least have something that kind of grounds us into certain places so that we can go back and look at specific parts. I don't see us filling out the whole entire sheet by any means. I don't even know. Like, we'll skip around, so we might fill out something on the front, some in the back, maybe not get to others. But I thought it was good to at least kind of have to take a look at us. Oh, yeah, that's right. I kind of remember what is going on with the whole Pooh Week thing at the end of Chapter 1, or the movie in reverse in Chapter 4 and all those things. So it's just a way to kind of remind us of some things, and we can kind of get into detail about it. But before taking a look at that sheet and running through those things, start off with you, so far as any kind of reactions or questions that we might have about chapters 1 through 5. Chapters 6 through 10, it's not really a whole lot different. Still like going to be the same kind of the plot structure that's happening. I do think you kind of get a little bit more clarity maybe with chapters 6 through 10 as to the mind of Billy Pilgrim, but that's still certainly kind of up for debate. Questions that people kind of, or thoughts that people have, why are we reading this? Has to be one of them. The whole like structure of it, it's a good one. Are things that people kind of ask about. Besides just like, okay, so it goes. I'm kind of sick and tired of reading about it. We decided that Billy Pilgrim and Holden Caulfield should have a conversation together, and Holden would say that kills me, and then Billy would just say so it goes. But Billy never actually says it, so you could argue that conversation.
Does he never actually say it?
No, because it's the narrator that just keeps going. So it goes. So any places that you folks want to start, whether it's on the note sheet or just random thoughts.
I just kept getting confused. He would be like, well, I'm in the war. Now I'm a baby. Now I'm off the I was like, where are you going?
So Billy's confused and you're confused.
Yeah, that's it.
Seems like most of the time falls asleep or passes out.
Or can't fall asleep.
Yeah.
So any I don't want to say trends or patterns, but is there anything that you seem to think kind of initiates a time travel? Because he says he has no control. The narrator says that he has no control over it, and he's certainly not necessarily going back to happy places. But does there seem to be any kind of rhyme or reason to it? So you said like sleepy nighttime.
All the time. It's falling asleep, passing out.
It's like a lull.
You said like a lull, like almost like a quiet moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't really seem to have to do with where he's at. Like at the moment of time travels, like I don't see a whole lot of parallels with what he's doing and where he time travels to.
Because when you do have this, when he first came unstuck in time, even mentions that, now he doesn't realize that what happened until after his abduction by the Tralfamadorians, but it's even before that he does get abducted by the Tralfamadorians. So it could be something sometimes where he will be leaving World War II, and then there's so many moments that he returns to World War II, but you'll have, which I think this makes sense for a lot of folks, that okay, he could be having some flashbacks, he could certainly be having some post-traumatic stress, type reenactments going on in his mind, but he'll also have things that are independent of the war when he'll be moving. So it's certainly not all war dependent. He'll also have things that are independent of war. I would say it does kind of tend to be more of like a nighttime type thing. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of control to it. I think the easiest explanation, and not that everything has to therefore have a logical, explanation to it, but I think the easiest thing is what's he doing? There wouldn't be all, and I don't even want. I mean, yes, you could say hallucinating, but also not all that different from us. Partially dreaming and just like flashback memory. Hey, where have you gone today? Some of you are like, I remember the weekend. Oh, that trip last year to Kalahari was great. Oh, that trip to Kalahari this weekend. Not going back there ever again. But we kind of think about those moments and do reenact them a little bit. Now, Billy certainly gets the sense that I'm not just reliving a moment, but I'm going back there. But in a lot of ways, it's memory, flashback, which, not to make it sound like we got to connect this back to Invisible Man, but Tim's luggage is his briefcase that he carries with him. In a lot of ways, Billy's luggage is this memory, all this stuff that he has with him as from World War II that impacts him somehow, some way. And certainly with the author, with Vonnegut, we know that he wants to write this book about the bombing of Dresden, doesn't know how to go about it, makes promises to Mary O'Hare, I'm not going to make it a heroic glorification of war novel, which it is the total opposite of that. He kind of has these memories that I'm not exactly sure how I go along writing it, and, this is what ends up kind of coming out from it. I do think an important distinction to understand, and I think Vonnegut tries to make this pretty clear, but it's easy as a reader to kind of lose sight of it as well, that Kurt Vonnegut does not equal Billy Pilgrim. They are certainly not the same person. He is. Well, he's the narrator, number one, and then he'll switch it to I, so that he kind of comes in. That was me. Those were my brains.
Yeah.
So they are distinct people, but they also have distinct views. So I think a person can certainly read the book and go, you know what? Kurt Vonnegut says don't worry about it. So it goes. Bad stuff happens. Move on. Live your life. Don't worry. You can become unstuck in time, unglued in time. And I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Look who showed up.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel like someone didn't read it, so
I read it all yesterday. Yeah, I read the whole book. It's pretty quick. Yeah. Green Book, second.
At lunch duty, I'll talk to Mr. Shoppy and be like, is this legitimate?
Did it say that?
Really too.
There we go. So the things that Billy does, or the things that Billy thinks, doesn't necessarily mean that that's what Vonnegut wants the person to take from it. So the phrase that causes more reaction probably than anything else has to be, so it goes. Do you like it? Is it therapeutic? Are you sick of reading it at this point?
I don't
You're taking a quiz. Take your quiz.
Opinions for everyone except for
That's right.
I like the saying. I mean, it's kind of like it is what it is, but shorter.
I don't because if it's Kurt Vonnegut saying it, he says it's what the trout from the doors told Billy Pilgrim when he showed up. So, like, is there a significance to that?
Well, you mean, is there significance that it's Tralfamadorian from the Dorian inspired?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Because the thing that certainly makes Tralfamadorians different from humans is their ability to see within the fourth dimension. So, and we kind of got into this with Siddhartha a little bit, according to Billy and narrator, how do you see things as a Tralfamadorian compared to humans?
Like a mountain.
So you see the mountain, you see everything that has kind of happened with the mountain. with like varicose vein legs, and then like canes and walkers and all that kind of stuff. So you see everything. So you see the beginning, you see the middle, you see the end. All of that stuff is happening simultaneously, and you decide what it is that you want to look at. So when Billy's at the zoo and asks his great thought-provoking question, how do you live in peace and harmony and not have wars? And all the Tralfamadorians close their eyes, and he can tell he said something stupid. Oh, we have that stuff. We just choose to ignore it. If you choose to ignore those things, or you know that a person or a being is going to die at some point, but you also know that that person is still alive at some other kind of sliver within history, this phrase makes a lot of sense because, yeah, so it goes. It doesn't matter that my TWA score died because I still have that other TWA score from someplace else that was so much better. I'm just going to look at that one right now. So the fact that it would be Tralfamadorian inspired, Emma, yeah, it's an alien viewpoint. The book gets classified as science fiction. The book gets classified as being an anti-war book. Another genre that the book tends to fall into is, I think something begins with an S. Or it's, sci-fi science fiction. But the way that it is written, the social commentary that it is providing is that it would be satirical. So when you are doing something satirical, you are kind of emphasizing weaknesses or follies that people have. One of those issues certainly could be that as humans, sometimes we become too complacent. So that setting of the fact that it's Vietnam War, people are dying left and right, some folks don't seem to care about it, that would be a criticism that Vonnegut could certainly have. I don't have anything listed on here with a page number for it. I think it's page 19. I think. Yes, page 19. I have told my sons, so this is still chapter 1, I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not, the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or belief. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that. So, chapter 1, Vonnegut's pretty clear. War is bad. Deaths matter. If we were comparing it to math murders, 1,000,001 should be just as significant as 1 or as 1,000,000, whatever that number should be, and you should not kind of take part in any kind of that massacre. If you were to take part in that massacre, then this could be a phrase that you might end up kind of fall back on. It happens. It's war. So it goes. That's life. Pick whatever kind of phrase that you would want with it. But I think that part on page 19 also reaffirms that there is certainly a difference between these folks. Vonnegut is going, my sons will not be part of any kind of war, any kind of massacre. Billy Pilgrim's son, Robert, is a Green Beret. So there's another little kind of distinction that would be taking place there. But it's nice, I think, for that, so it goes, and certainly in some moments that might be therapeutic and a good thing to do. You don't want to dwell on all the problems. But to say that you're going to completely ignore them, I think that's where Vonnegut really has some serious issues and problems.
I have a question, whatever. Forget what was the scene where it was with Rosewater and they were talking about the book. And I think I don't remember if there was another scene before, but I noticed that the candy that they were eating, I think there's two instances where it was the Three Musketeers, and then there's like the emphasis on Leary and his Three Musketeers.
Mm-hmm.
After Rosewater started talking about the galaxy, the ones he started eating a Milky Way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, she finishes her Three Musketeers, and then she starts having the Milky Way as they're talking about space travel and science fiction and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Good job.
Heath gets the gold. You're like, you did read.
Look who read the book. Yeah.
Well, and
I'm sorry I ever said that.
and this isn't all of them, but certainly the Three Musketeers getting mentioned with it. You do have certainly some elements of, and this is again different from the Milky Way. you do certainly have some elements of repetition throughout the course of the book, and I think it does do a couple things. So, you know, the Three Musketeers, you have Roland's Three Musketeers story, you have Valencia eating it. It does at least kind of add a sense, and I would say sense with quotation marks, a sense of order. Or like consistency, where despite how scattered it is, all of these things still kind of relate somehow, some way. So like, for example, orange and black. Not orange is the new black, but just orange and black. Where do we see them? On the train. And so it's the banner that goes on, basically, don't bomb the train, these are prisoners of war. And then where does orange and black show up again? The wedding tent, which I don't know if Vonnegut's saying to be married is like being a prisoner of war.
I was kind of like, I would have picked.
Yeah, I was just thinking that that's an ugly color combo.
The bridesmaids wore, you know.
Maybe like.
But there are things that essentially at least kind of link what seems to be unrelated events together. A word that he also uses quite a bit are like babies. And it could be, you know, you take a look at the very beginning with the epigram. Right after the dedication, you have the cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, but the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. And you're going to have reference to this happening later on in the book in chapter 9, I believe. But then you have babies coming up with Mary O'Hare, her criticism of Vonnegut and her husband. When they were soldiers, they were just babies then, and refers to that kind of idea over and over and over again, which leads to Vonnegut making what promise? I'll call my book The Children's Crusade. Which means he's going to try to at least do a more honest depiction of it. Now, the Children's Crusade ends up being a sham. It ends up being, you know, a ghastly scene or moment in time in its own right. But this would certainly kind of go against, or at the very least juxtapose, Roland's version of war. Where, why are we the Three Musketeers that Heath was talking about? Because we stick together. We drag this college student who wasn't fit for army, you know, for military life. We made him pull through even though he didn't want to. He's glamorizing war. He's romanticizing war. And Vonnegut wants to throw it out that, hey, this is just as chaotic as any other place could be. There's no way to really try to make semblance of it. So I'm just going to kind of slap all this stuff together and kind of, in some ways, portray the absurdity of people trying to glorify something that is so horrific. You could even argue, historically, whose death does he highlight, allusion-wise? It's around page 51, if I remember. Because this does happen in World War II. Eddie Slavic gets mentioned. It's 51 or 49. Might be 49. Not a page, then that's bad. Might be the case. Nope, not a page. Must be. Oh, 45. Page 45. Billy sat down in the waiting room. He wasn't a widower yet. He sensed something hard under the cushion of his overstuffed chair. He dug it out and discovered that it was a book, The Execution of Private Slavic by William Bradford Youth. It was a true account, and it is. It was a true account of the death before an American firing squad of Private Eddie D. Slavic, 36896415, the only American soldier to be shot for cowardice since the Civil War. So it goes. What does Slavic not do?
He directly challenged the authority of the government.
He does not fight, and by not fighting, he does not partake in a massacre. And he dies. So it goes. So he is a character who does everything that Vonnegut is basically saying you shouldn't, and he meets obviously the same fate as those who may partake in a massacre. But to not partake in a massacre, is it something that you have to be willing to do to go against government, to go against what is expected, to go against, Weary's version of war, and be able to kind of take a stand, but know that you're still possibly going to be facing a firing squad for essentially leaving your post and not partaking in the war. But it's certainly pretty, I'd say, significant that that is a person that he mentioned, because to essentially do what Mary O'Hare wants, it could still ultimately result in someone's death taking place. But that whole idea where, not partaking in a massacre, Slavic is a person that does that, but has, an unfortunate fate that takes place. End of chapter 1. I want to make sure we touch on this one. Mentions the biblical story of Lot. Vonnegut's religious views kind of get debated in different ways, and basically he has said, I'm a humanist, so he believes in humans having the ability of free will. He believes humans have the control to do things. He's very scientific in his approach. He does acknowledge higher powers very well probably exist, but doesn't think that those higher powers are going to determine what happens to humans. Humans still kind of determine what's going to happen to them. So he does say some things and write some things that people kind of think would be critical of, whether it be Christianity or organized religion in general. But he does make a point of focusing on Lot, and especially Lot's wife is the person who he admires the most. Lot's wife is the one who he makes reference to being a pillar of salt. Story of Lot, you have the destruction of 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and basically tell Lot and his family, you are able to leave, you'll survive the destruction, which is pretty important because we're dealing with the destruction of a city within Dresden. As long as you don't look back, you'll be okay. Lot's wife looks back, turns into a pillar of salt. Vonnegut follows that up with, and that's what I love about her, it's so human of her to look back. That is why this book must be written, and then he throws in the idea that he too is that he's a pillar of salt. What's Vonnegut doing? He's looking back. So you have to look back, which by looking back, it's the total opposite of what 3-word phrase. So it goes. I'm looking back. I have to investigate it. I have to write about it. I have to talk about it. I have to get ideas out there. I have to be able to look back. So not so it goes. Any ideas on why I write it this way? Does it work?
I think it does, because I think it does a good job of like I'm never really confused where they are or anything, like what's happening. I still don't really see the purpose of it.
Yeah, it's always weird. It's always kind of easy. The reason I think he falls is because anytime he does something, like let's say he falls asleep, he's like asleep in the next part, and they're all kind of like connected and weird. And it's all similar.
Did he write this like before he started writing the book, or is this like after he finished writing the book, like this first chapter? Because he was like, I'm gonna make this the teapot seem like the climax of the story, but he already like mentioned it.
Like when he's talking to like Bernard, like in this like the whole war buddy, like I want to make this the big. It's something that he has certainly has been floating around in his mind for a long time. And so he says, yeah, the part where he gets shot for stealing the teapot, it's so rich with irony, and it has to be a great climactic scene that takes place. So I think he's certainly been thinking about ways to go about doing it. But it's not something where chapter 1 is written, and then 3 years later is when he decides to do chapters 2 through 9. It's all very organic and kind of happens together at the same time. Because chapter 1's more, so he'll have manuscripts that he's kind of been working on. But chapter 1 is happening as the book is unfolding for him. If you were simply just to take the book and, hey, this does not have anything mentioned about World War II, Dresden, Vietnam, Vonnegut dealing with depression and PTSD, and you just read it, I think some people are going to go, this is pointless. I know some people are going to go, that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Third law of motion, that's useful in rocketry.
Yeah.
That's my favorite line.
My favorite.
Followed by Vonnegut and his brains that, Jesse likes on page 125. I think a question to kind of think about is, how does it help him achieve his overall purpose? And not saying that we need to try to overanalyze it in every single little detail, but how does him setting it up this way help him get his point across that, that folks are too complacent, that maybe we rely too much on so it goes, that this helps kind of unearth the tragedy of war? Because I think if you were to tell someone, here's a book about Dresden, a big complaint that some folks might have, he doesn't really talk about Dresden. And there's not going to be a climactic chapter in 8, 9, 10 where, and here's the Dresden chapter, because it ends up staying like this the whole time throughout.
I was going to say that, it could be like, why don't we look back on what kids have done in the past? It doesn't have to go through every time.
Okay, yeah, and we'll pick up with this tomorrow. How does the structure work or not work?
The last word was still new and
Oh yeah.
white.